Hello and welcome to this very special discussion series on Autocar Professional titled A New Order. In this four-part series, what we will do is look at the road ahead for the automobile and mobility industry. And as we are witnessing a growing trend of collaboration in the industry, in the spirit of collaboration, we are joined by none other than Dr. V. Sumantran, an industry veteran, technocrat, strategist, and an author too. So, Dr. Sumantran, thank you very much for collaborating with us in this very special project. Thank you very much for your participation.
A pleasure to be here, Sumantran. Thank you for inviting me. I look forward to it.
Great. So, viewers, as I was mentioning, we are going to look at the road ahead for the automotive and mobility industry. We'll have discussion with Dr. Sumantran on various topics. And in each of the episodes, we'll have one special industry leader from the Indian and the global automotive industry who will share his views, well equipped with the experience and learnings of the COVID-19 pandemic scenario that we have crossed so far. So we look forward to great discussions in this series. So to kick off the discussion, Dr. Sumantran, if I may ask you the first question about, at a macro level, the COVID-19 pandemic has really devastated both demand and supply. I'm not talking about India, but if you look at, let's say, start off with India and then maybe a broader perspective, what may the auto industry expect for its recovery, and how long do you think it would take?
I think, first of all, COVID has been a huge humanitarian hit on all of human society in India, globally. So clearly that has been the biggest issue to get around. Of course, very soon after that, one has to think about people's livelihoods, think about the economy, jobs that have to be sustained, and so on. I think in this whole journey of trying to come back to some degree of normalcy, whatever the new normal is going to be, I think we're going to have to deal with three kinds of issues. Perhaps superficially, there will be the whole set of operational issues. How do we get the economy started? How do people start to move around? How do we get supply chains going? How do you get factories to operate? So there's going to be a whole bunch of operational issues. There's going to be a whole bunch of economic issues, because this has been a very big hit economically for much of the country, much of society. We'll have to prepare finances. There are stimulus packages. There is soft loans. A whole bunch of initiatives to be able to bridge the economic gap that people have trying to get back to normal life. Perhaps most importantly, there has been the cultural and the psychological issues. There has been a deep amount of pain caused to people because of what they've had to go through, both on the health side and on the economic side. There are new rules about social distancing that's going to change the way they deal with an automobile product or even with mobility. There is going to be a greater familiarity. I mean, we're having this wonderful conversation on digital media, and all of a sudden, people are getting used to work from home. They're used to teleconferencing. There's going to be changes in demand patterns for travel for work or even for conferences. Flexible work hours are being introduced as a result of this. And there is a greater awareness of the health and safety issues. All of this together, the operational, the economic, and the social and the psychological, are all going to impact how, whether it's the auto industry or mobility, gets back to some new normal as we have to continue to build our economic development.
I don't think anyone would be able to kind of even guess how long it may take for the industry to reach a stage where it even kind of closely resembles what the industry was at before the pandemic attack. Would it be?
No, that's true. I think it's very difficult to predict, because the moment you say there's a new normal,
Hmm.
You have a varying milestone. You don't have a familiar milestone to get back to. So I think there will be a fair amount of uncertainty as to when we will have reached a new norm.
And what would be the new parameters in this new normals, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, and also before this global pandemic arrived, the industry was already kind of uh, struggling or kind of facing certain disruptions, so to speak, in the form of various global megatrends, namely, as CASE or ACEs, as people put the acronym, autonomous, connected,
Yeah.
electrification, shared mobility. Uh, India was influenced in varying degrees by these, but now with COVID-19, it seems that the entire challenge takes a different scale, and in also intensity also is very different now. So will it compound? How can the industry tackle with such a big challenge now? And this whole challenge will get much compounded significantly, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, even before COVID, we were seeing some very unusual trends. For instance, globalization. The question was, is globalization going to continue? We've seen strident nationalism come up in so many places. UK is no longer going to be part of the EU. It's going to be Brexit. NAFTA was torn up, and we said we have a new USMCA agreement. So the rise of nationalism, which was running counter to globalism, was a major trend in the auto industry that we were facing even before COVID. The second is, people were saying, let's get used to a different level of GDP growth expectations. Steady state growth expectations for the global economy used to be around 4% or so, 3.5 to 4%. People start saying, don't expect that anymore. China growth is coming down, US growth has come down, Europe is at very, very low levels of growth. So people said the global economy should get used to a different level of GDP growth. And then, of course, there was this whole business of the climate accords and trying to make the planet a cleaner, greener place. Already, we began to see nations dismantle or shake the foundations of things like the Paris Climate Accord. All of this was happening even before COVID. Now, with the additional pressures, it is going to very significantly uh, distort the economic landscape that on which we're going to build a new norm.
Right. Dr. Sumantran, before we welcome the guest of this episode, my last question to you is, how will the industries, what would you recommend to the industry in terms of uh, redefining the strategies, especially because the Indian automotive industry was already facing certain big kind of challenges, namely your transition to BS6, kind of adapting to this whole new trend of shared mobility. In addition to that, preparing for electrification. How much will the strategy change, and what would you advise?
I think in a situation like this, we were on a momentum to a transformation of the industry. We've been hit by COVID, and without a doubt, we have to take care of the present, hopefully without fundamentally changing long-term plans. And so I expect whatever is the strategy will be a hybrid strategy. It's going to be a hybrid based on near-term imperatives as a result of COVID, superposed on a longer term strategy that we were essentially going towards, hopefully cleaner mobility, we're going to electrification and all the topics that you mentioned. It also is going to mean, therefore, that in the short term, because of COVID now, the plans have to be very significantly changed, particularly because of the pressure on cash. Getting the global economy to kind of go to idle mode for several weeks, if not a couple of months, is a huge ask. And it has depleted the coffers of most companies. Cash flow is becoming extremely precious, and now we're going to have to somehow muster the cash, not only to survive, but also to make these investments. So I really expect, therefore, that this will push people into even smarter use of capital. And very often this may mean partnering. We've seen, for example, huge companies like Volkswagen and Ford saying, you know what, let's put our money together in terms of our strategy for electrification and autonomy. We've seen similarly GM and Honda. Honda is going to make all their future electric cars out of the GM electric platform. So we're going to find people saying, I need to get to the future state, but I need to get to the future state with a smarter way of using and allocating capital.
So, I mean, as I've been observing over the years, collaboration, which was kind of an exceptional strategy at one stage, became almost a norm in the last few years. And now I think COVID-19 has pushed it into the category of a strategy of necessity, I would say.
Yeah.
Right.
Very true.
Right, Dr. Sumantran. Now I think it's time to welcome our guests. We will. I have more questions to ask you, but soon after this discussion with our guest for this episode, Dr. Pawank Goenka, Managing Director of Mahindra Mahindra. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome our guest of this episode, inaugural episode of A New Order, a discussion series which looks at the road ahead for the Indian and the global auto industry. And our guest is Dr. Pawank Goenka, Managing Director of Indian automobile major Mahindra Mahindra. So, Dr. Goenka, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for sparing your time.
It's nice to be talking to you, Sumantran. Long time.
Yes, thank you. It's my pleasure. And tell us, it's been exactly almost 2 months since the national lockdown started. What have been your experiences and the key takeaways, if I'm able to ask?
Well, let me put a positive side and a negative side of working from home. Positive side is that it works much better than any of us thought it would be. And the work that we do, of course, the plants and showrooms were not functioning, but the work that we do has happened without missing a beat. And we have all gotten very used to it. IT technology has worked very well. The negative side is that the distinction between day, evening, and night, and weekday and weekend has totally gone away. And everybody is complaining that we are now more 24/7 than we used to be when we had an office to go to. But I think overall it's not that difficult to work from. That's what we all realize.
And we are here to learn more about your thoughts on the business strategies or corporate strategies that the industry would need to kind of take in the coming months and years. And Dr. Sumantran, you have some questions for Dr. Goenka.
Yeah, Pawan, great to see you again. I think, of course, the topmost issue has been the humanitarian cost of COVID to the nation and to the world. But now, as we try to get the economy back, industries are trying to, get operations back and running. I know for the industry and people like you, one of the major concerns is to make sure that we can make a safe start for our employees. It's going to take a lot of discipline. It's going to be not so easy. And in a very large, somewhat chaotic country like India, how do you see this restart of the business going? How long will it take for us to get to, say, 70% of normal production?
I think there is a snag there.
Yeah, I think I lost you for a while.
Dr. Goenka, sorry, can we do the question again, please, Dr. Sumantran?
Okay. So let me take the start from Pawan, great to see you again. Delighted to see that things are slowly getting back to thinking about operations. I know the topmost issue for the country and the world has been the humanitarian cost of COVID. But now as we try to get the economy back, lots of challenges, particularly for people like you, very concerned about safety of employees. We're a large country, sometimes a chaotic country. The kinds of discipline, the protocols needed to get a large operation running, not just in your company, but at tier 1, tier 2, major challenge. How do you see this pan out, and what can we do to somewhat instill the discipline we need?
So, Sumantran, good to see you after a long time, and nice to be talking to Sumantra and Sumantran. Never done that before. Okay. See, your question is very valid. As we start coming back to work, as we start operating our plants and our showrooms, clearly the concern on safety and health of our employees is a topmost thing in our mind. And you said that our country is a chaotic country, unfortunately true. But I think what the lockdown has taught us is to become very disciplined about coronavirus. And today, when I see how a shopkeeper, any person on the street, people in the society, people at work are very careful. I hope that we have learned a civic discipline that we need to have to keep coronavirus away. No matter what the government does, no matter what the employers do, if people themselves are not careful about not catching the virus, we cannot stop it. And therefore, we are trying very hard to bring in the discipline, which already is there, fortunately, amongst everybody that we're working with, whether our employees, our suppliers, our transporters, our showroom employees, that please take care of basic things about social distancing, about sanitizing, about wearing a mask, about not touching things. And I think that is what we can do. Having said that, in the plant, as you know very well, Sumantran, to maintain social distancing and yet run a line is a very challenging task. Lines were never designed for social distancing. So we're doing what we can by reducing the number of people that man one line, so that there is at least 2 meter, I think it's 2 meter of distance between people. Constant sanitizing, fumigation that we're doing of the plant. Very, very careful. But once the production starts going up, it's going to become a lot more difficult to manage with a kind of reduced number of people in the plant and reduced social distancing. But I always believe that Indians are very innovative. We would come out with ways and means of finding solutions to all these problems. No matter what happens, we should not lose sight of the fact that we cannot let coronavirus sort of take over our lives. We have to find ways of working around the problems and find solutions. And I'm sure we would.
You know, the other part of this whole coronavirus has been seldom has humanity seen a simultaneous bomb both on the demand side and on the supply side. We seem to have really had a big bomb dropped on both sides of the business. We're going to devote an entire separate episode on the supply chain. So I'll just jump to addressing the demand side, because this is something I know many people want to ask, and somebody like you would have a very important perspectives. On the one hand, people say people coming out of COVID are going to be concerned about social distancing. They will avoid public transit. Maybe personal mobility will again become a lot more popular. People want to be protected by themselves. On the other hand, we're also going to see people coming out of a very disastrous economic cycle. Job losses, wage cuts, all of this have been all over the country. This means spending power is going to be constrained. So overall, of course, the two-wheeler market, the four-wheeler market, and the commercial vehicle market will behave differently. But how do you see these two trends play out, particularly in a place like India?
Well, it's what should I say, $1 trillion question on how all this is going to pan out. Let me first admit that nobody knows. Okay, nobody's an expert right now, and we can all have theories, but only time will tell how things will pan out. But I have 3 data points of 3 countries. One from China. As you know, the China demand has more or less come back to normal. I was reviewing things in Korea just 2-3 days ago, and Korean market, domestic market, has in fact had a growth in the month of April compared to last year April. So again, that's a good sign. And I was talking to somebody in USA, one of the auto majors in USA, and they told me that as of today, in the month of May, the demand is ahead of what it was last year. So somehow, if I was to think that India might follow the same path as these 3 very large markets have followed, then maybe the demand will come back sooner than we think. That's the optimist in me thinking. But if I was to come back to the reality, the concern that you have mentioned, that while I do agree that there would be some tendency to say that I must not use shared transport and I must have my own vehicle, right? But the affordability will come in the way. And India is not a country where masses can afford to buy a four-wheeler at least, maybe two-wheeler, yes, but not a four-wheeler. And therefore, I think it becomes very important, Sumantran, on what we can do with the EMI of the vehicles that we are selling. I have no doubt that the OEMs will do whatever they can to keep the prices as low as they can afford to. But at the same time, and this is the only reason why we have been approaching the government of India, to say that at least for a temporary period, something has to be done to help to reduce that EMI of the buyer, whether it is financing rate, whether it is GST, whether it is some scrappers policy, whatever it might be. We do need to give a kick to the demand cycle to move it from a situation of despair to a situation of hope and get into what I call the virtuous cycle to get the demand going. And I believe that once demand is there, supply will get fixed. We will find ways and means of fixing supply if demand is there. Government has obviously done a lot of things to help on the supply side, like the MSME credit liquidity thing that they've worked on. But even without that, I think we would find a way of getting supply going once demand comes back. And therefore, that has to be our primary focus on how to get the demand back to normal.
Sumantra, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sumantran. Dr. Goenka, I was just thinking about the latest and perhaps the most significant trend in the auto market as of now. It was brewing for some time, and I'm referring to digital, tapping the digital space for auto retail. On one side, do you think this COVID-19 phase has really brought it into a mainstream as a tool, as the new face of auto retail? And the other part of the question is, there has been a kind of, because it was triggered by the slowdown prior to COVID-19 about the viability of the conventional dealership setup. So that was also, dealers were also looking at kind of revisiting that business model. In these two scenarios, do you expect now the digital auto retailing to be the new phase of auto retail? And what happens to the conventional dealership setup?
So, Sumantra, COVID-19 will bring a lot of changes to the way we do our business and the way we work. The way we work, we already talked a little bit about the work from home, but that's not the only thing. A lot more will change on the way we work. And similarly, the way we do our business, a lot will change on the supply side and on the selling side. Since you are focusing on the selling side, let me say that probably the biggest change that you would notice or we would experience as we move forward is on how we sell our vehicles. Okay. We have experienced the technology and the power of technology by force. Okay. And many myths that we had are getting busted. Okay. The old saying that you cannot buy a car till you kick the tire, probably the myth that is also getting busted. And therefore, I think customers would become a lot more. Let me go back 5 years ago. How many of us felt comfortable buying a shirt online without trying it out? Right now, at least younger people are very comfortable doing that. Same thing will happen to the cars. To be able to buy a car with very good online, almost virtual reality kind of information available, customers would be able to test out and work everything online. And Mahindra has already launched just about 2 weeks ago, online sort of app or portal, whatever you want to call it, for doing everything online. Inquiries, specs, ordering, paying, insurance, financing, everything online, and delivery. So therefore, the end-to-end process of doing complete cycle of buying a car from the inquiry to delivery will start happening online. And I'm not going to say that 100% of the customers will switch to that, but I think more and more customers will switch to that. Now, what is the benefit of that? The benefit of that is, first of all, you can put a lot more information online. Second, for us, for OEMs, the information becomes consistent. When I say consistent, is that today we depend on how well the sales manager is able to translate the information that we provide to a customer. And we cannot say that all sales managers are very good. All sales managers are able to do a very good job translating that. There will be good ones, there will be better ones. There will be ones that in fact can do it better than what we tell them. But there are many who probably will not be able to do that. Now we can do it in a consistent manner through online communication. That's number one. Number two, the cost of selling, which has now become as much as 7 to 8% of the price of the vehicle. When you include the working capital, the cost of infrastructure, the cost of manpower, the discount that we have given, all that will come down as a result of that. Okay, and that would then allow us to obviously pass on the benefit to the customers. It will not happen tomorrow, but over time, as we start getting into this real online benefit to the cost of selling. And third, the number of dealerships probably will go down. We won't require as many people because customers won't need to go to the showrooms, and we won't need to do so many test drives. Test drives probably will become centralized, where there's an agency who will bring the car to your home, and you don't need to go to the dealer to do test drive. So all of those benefits will happen in terms of reducing the cost of selling. Right? Negative is employment, because the number of people who are employed by our dealers today is about 50 lakhs, right? Now, will that number come down by a small margin, by a large margin? We don't know that yet, but clearly the efficiency will bring in lower employment in our dealerships. Hopefully we will sell more vehicles and therefore employ more people, but per vehicle, the number of people selling a vehicle will go down.
Pawan, I want to come back to the theme of industries and kind of capital expenditure we've been forced to allocate. I used to say, I'm glad I'm not in the auto business anymore, because running an auto company now is like being this captain of a super tanker, and you've got 3 tidal waves coming at you. This was even before COVID. We said, we got to get through BS6 migration, and then we got to make this huge investment for electrification. And by the way, after that comes this huge transformation in the industry, saying there's more and more of the industry going to mobility services, and you invest there. None of this took into account the COVID effect. COVID's come in, it's depleted financials, it's been a big hole, and yet the investments we need to make on these other major trends are not going to go away. So clearly companies have to be a lot smarter about how they will deploy their investments or allocate this. Is this a time for better cooperation, joint ventures, perhaps even consolidation in the industry? One of the challenges is in India, at least outside of two-wheelers, we lack the kind of scale you need to navigate through these kinds of investments.
So, Sumantran, let me first say that you are very much part of auto industry. Once you are in this industry, you cannot get out. It's like a one-way street. So don't think that you are not part of it. Yes, you are today not running a company. That's fine. But I think you are as connected to the industry as any of us are. The points that you have talked about, again, are something that are already on their way. Okay? What COVID-19 does is probably accelerate the pace of what needs to happen. Okay? The collaboration, sharing platforms, joint ventures has become the order of the day. And even the very large companies, very large global OEMs cannot do everything on their own, right? And therefore it's already started. The question that comes up is that because of COVID-19, will there be only an acceleration to what has been happening, or will there be some, let's say, consolidation, some people not able to manage, and so on and so forth. So investments, I've always maintained, and this is, we have gone through many slowdowns over the last 15, 20 years. Every 5, 6 years we have one. Of course, COVID-19 is the worst that anybody has ever seen. So it's not the same, but every time we say the same thing. We say that we have to manage the present without compromising the future. Therefore, in auto industry, investments in product and technology is the foundation. And you know that as well as anybody else does. And without that foundation, we have no future. Therefore, we can never stop investing in capital investment in technology and product. BS6 obviously was a lot of investment for us, and to that extent, the COVID-19 comes at a wrong time. Of course, there's no right time, but we were just about launching BS6. Right? We have not even established prices of BS6. No customer has paid the increased price of BS6. Once you come out of COVID-19 and suddenly say, "Oh, the price has gone up," that's going to be a double shock. So we have to manage that, no doubt. The question that comes up is that the two trends that were happening in auto industry, one is of shared mobility and second of electric vehicle. Will those trends get compromised because of COVID-19? The general wisdom today is that shared mobility will take a backseat. Okay, we talked about that earlier also. We have seen that from data in China. We have seen that from data in India. That obviously right now there is no mobility. But there clearly is going to be a tendency for not using a shared vehicle, shared platform, including public transport. Whether that's temporary or permanent, we don't know, but that certainly will be there for the next several months. And this will then have an impact on what kind of cars we make, what kind of growth do we see, and everything gets connected. The second one is electric vehicle. Now, electric vehicle, we can argue either way right now. One argument will be that companies right now have to manage their survival, and therefore they will not have money to invest in electric vehicles, and therefore electric vehicles will slow down. That's one argument. The second argument is that we would all realize that without having IC engine vehicles emitting pollution from the tailpipe, we really can breathe, right? And everywhere you see that cities are so clean, such nice air, the CO2 has gone down, everything. And therefore, there may be more of a tendency to say, look, we need to move faster to electric vehicle than what we had planned. I am of the opinion personally, though I have no basis for it, but I have fundamental belief that the second is more likely to happen rather than first, especially where the investments are not very large. Where it will get compromised probably are the plans for a born electric vehicle with billions of dollars in investment in the platform. But the conversion of IC engine vehicle to electric vehicles, which are not very expensive, and that's what most of what India has today is that. I think that will continue and probably will get accelerated. I think the push from the government of India to go to electric vehicle will become even larger, because we have tested what will happen if there are less number of IC vehicles running on the road. And I think the push to use electric vehicles for Make in India will also become larger, because this is one area where we don't want to give it out on a platter to somebody else to take advantage of. I don't know if I have kind of answered your question, but it's fairly...
Yeah, I think you have. I mean, very few people have the clear perspectives like you. But it gets to a nice segue into the next thought I had in my mind, both on the topic of the amount of investments needed and this whole business of making sure that the economy, particularly from an Indian manufacturer's point of view, remains viable. Today, frankly, with the kind of investment this industry requires, the only people who seem to have that kind of money is you either got to be Amazon or you got to be a Chinese automaker. I mean, these are the only two people who seem to have the kind of unlimited budgets to do whatever they want. Certainly in India now, we're seeing the next level of strategy played out by the Chinese automakers. I know you have, and I know in my time I have, we've all tried to build Indian businesses with operations in China, and it's been extremely difficult. There were rules against you. You needed a 50% JV partner, distribution channels, your hands were tied. But we seem to have a completely lopsided arrangement as far as what their companies can do in India. And it is reflected in the kind of trade imbalance that we have, particularly rapidly growing in autos and auto components. And heaven forbid if this were to extend to EVs. How is it that we're not seeing a stronger voice? On the one hand, we need the Make in India as a very prestigious platform. And on the other hand, we need a voice that says, at least we need a level playing field. We're not asking for protectionism, but we need a level playing field, absent which we have to have the smarts that the Chinese had in manipulating the WTO.
Okay. So let me put this in 2 or 3 different parts. Okay, first part is what you said about China. I think everybody will agree with, and I'm not making a political statement, but clearly China has managed its own interests very well. Okay, how they have done it, everybody knows about it. The history is there, and they've been able to work around WTO. They've been able to kind of entice investment into the country, and they have grown manufacturing from zero to what we have today. And there are a lot of things that they've done very well. Some of these things we may or may not agree with, but I think the result is there for everybody to see. And therefore, for us to learn from China on how to grow manufacturing, and it's never too late. But for us to learn from China on how to grow manufacturing is something that we must take very seriously. And if you look at countries around the world, or in Southeast Asia, clearly Vietnam now is following sort of that model. And growing manufacturing reasonably well. I think if you look at the manufacturing growth that has happened in Vietnam, of course, for a small country, they have done very well in the last few years, and they have in fact leveraged China to some extent to bring manufacturing into Vietnam. And today, when you look at companies going out of China, which is something that gets talked about very often, that there are many manufacturing companies going out of China because the end sort of users are realizing that you cannot depend on one source. Unfortunately, a lot of that is going away from India, not into India, right? There may be 2 or 3 things that have happened in India, and mostly it's going outside. And therefore, how do we entice these companies? How do we attract these companies which are coming out of China to be coming to India, make India the destination, is the major order of the day. Okay? Now, so that again, everybody knows, and everybody may be thinking, look, what is the government of India doing? Why it's not happening? Now, India, fortunately or unfortunately, works with a very well laid out policies, right? And the kind of flexibility that a country like Vietnam may have in deciding what needs to be done is not there in India, because India has to follow the policy that it has. I'm not trying to defend anything. I'm just saying that that's how India is, because we do not give flexibility, because otherwise it can become very, very chaotic if everybody started doing what they wanted to. Again, having said that, let me tell you, though it's not something that gets talked about too much, that there is tremendous work going on right now. And I'm privy to some of that. Tremendous work going on right now within Government of India on how do we make manufacturing more attractive in India? How do we make India a global manufacturing hub for some identified sectors? Okay. And we have had several meetings, a lot of conversation going on, clear realization that this is a time for us to make it happen. Now, let me focus more on auto industry in this context. Right? In auto industry, let's look at auto components and auto OEMs. Auto components today are about $17 billion of import and about $15 billion of export. We are working right now with the Government of India, ACMA, auto OEMs together to see how do we reduce import, increase export. ACMA is taking a target of doubling export within 5 years. Okay, and it's not just wishful thinking. There are a lot of things that are being done on how to make export of Indian components more competitive than what it is today. Okay, a lot of it has to be done by the industry itself. Some of it has to be facilitated by the Government of India, but all that is happening. In fact, I have a meeting later today on the very same subject. As far as import is concerned, when we look at what is getting imported into India, one of the big chunk is electronic components, okay, for auto industry. And again, we are working with the electronic component industry to see why is electronic component not competitive made in India, and why is it cheaper to import from X, Y, or Z country. And so that's the other thing that we are working on very aggressively. On the auto OEM, there are constraints that we have because of the FTAs, which do not allow us the same sort of level playing field that many of the other countries have. And again, we are working very closely with the Commerce Department or the Department of Commerce to see, is there a possibility? Now, obviously, FTAs take years to sort of cook, and therefore, and not something that will happen overnight. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it is not something where nobody is doing anything. What we achieve, I don't know right now, but I have never seen such a sincere and serious effort to try and grow manufacturing in India in the auto industry, both at the component level and at the OEM level. And the same thing happening in many other sectors that, as I said earlier, that I'm involved in some of these discussions.
It's very encouraging to hear. Perhaps going to the last question, the auto industry around the world has been a huge employer. And as a result, nations have a motivation to shore it up and make it a successful industry. In India, the two-wheeler side, we seem to have got our act together. We've got scale, we've got brands, we've got a combination of quality and cost, and now we're on to this overseas acquisition of brands, overseas presence. I think we seem to be on a good track as far as two-wheelers are concerned. I'll leave the cars for a minute, but if we go to commercial vehicles, is there an opportunity for India to replicate the two-wheeler success story in the sense that we have a reasonably large domestic market? We have a very brutal customer emphasis on a combination of cost and quality. Our products are not, the cheap breakdown quality. Our products are relatively rugged and reliable, so we have a good mix of quality and cost. And a lot of the world needs commercial vehicles that fit this description. They're all focused on total cost of ownership. They don't only look for the 14-inch touchscreen TVs on the truck cabins to make it viable. How do we build a success story somewhat along the lines of the two-wheeler business for the commercial side of Indian industry?
So again, Sumantran, this is food for thought, and obviously not something that we're thinking for the first time, but it's a very good point. That is commercial vehicle a segment that India should focus on to become global in nature, than worrying too much about passenger vehicles. And let's face it, in passenger vehicles, what our effort is really to become a manufacturing nation and not so much about Indian products or even what gets exported today, depending on whether, because even Maruti is exported as Suzuki and not as Maruti. Yeah. What gets imported today is probably 80-85% of brands that are not Indian. So, yeah, like you said, let's leave passenger vehicle aside. On commercial vehicle, clearly Indian manufacturers have an advantage in India for sure. Okay, and whether it's Tata, Leyland, Mahindra, we probably corner Bajaj for three-wheelers. We probably corner 95% of the market, and it's a large market. It's not a small market. Now, is this an opportunity for us to become truly global? Answer is yes, provided we do few things. Okay, what are those few things? The product that we sell in the commercial vehicle segment in India is not a product that will sell in most countries. Okay, the reason for that is the specs that we have, the power to weight ratio that we have is much lower than what even most of the sort of emerging market countries will accept, right? And therefore, if you're going to export in a big way, and obviously everybody's working on it, so it's not like we're not working on it, but we cannot export the product that we sell in India and become large exporter. We have to then design, develop products for, and let's keep our focus on emerging markets. Let's not say that we're going to export to Germany or export to USA. Let's start with emerging markets. And even for emerging markets, most emerging markets would want a somewhat different product that what we sell in USA, in India. Clearly, Bajaj has done very well with three-wheeler export. That's one end of commercial vehicle. And Tata's and Leyland have a reasonably good export of heavy commercial vehicle, but still a very small percentage of total volume. We have good export of pickups, but still a very small percentage of our overall volume. And I think all of us should probably draw our export strategy centered around commercial vehicles. But I would say that passenger vehicles are always more glamorous. And we always want to rush to passenger vehicles quickly and want to sell few Scorpios and XUVs and so on and so forth. But commercial vehicle is, I think, where the real opportunity for India is, or for Indian OEMs is. in becoming truly global. And like tractor, different subject, but tractor is same thing. The tractor, India is very big market, the largest market. India has very powerful OEMs in tractor, but even in tractors, the same thing applies, that the tractors that are sold in India are not necessarily the tractors that are right for the global market. And there also we need to catch the global market by designing products for those markets. And today, if you look at the export of tractors, the percentage of total production in India, I don't know what the number would be, but it won't be much higher than 10%. Okay. Can India focus on tractor and become big exporter of tractor globally? Because again, it doesn't take rocket science to develop tractors that are required for, at least for, I'm not counting the large farms of Brazil and large farms of USA, but for rest of the farms of 50 hectare, 100 hectare type, can we design tractors that will be right for those? Indian tractors again tend to be very low power and used differently but they're very robust. They're very robust. They're very durable. Can we take that out and do something with it? So yes, commercial vehicle and tractor are two areas where India can truly become international.
Well, as always, Pawan, it's a pleasure talking to you, and you come up with very clear ideas and perspectives. Sumantran, I'll turn it back to you.
But before Sumantran takes over, Sumantran, you have many times asked me to come visit you at your home when I come to Chennai. Hasn't happened yet, but I can see one room of your house now.
Including the picture from Saab.
Okay. Good to talk to you, Sumantran.
See it in person next time.
And indeed, for me, I'm sure it was a really enriching experience to hear two great veteran minds of the auto industry discuss, and I'm sure it will be a very valuable experience for our viewers also. Dr. Goenka, thank you very much for sparing your time. Indeed, we also got a sneak peek into your home, and sorry, because of work from my home environment, you could see my daughter kind of taking a peek and going back. So I'm a little bit.
Yeah, we can figure out how old anybody's children are by looking at what's on the walls.
Right.
Always pleasure to talk to you, Sumantran.
Thank you. Please take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Those were some very interesting viewpoints shared by industry veteran and managing director of Mahindra Mahindra, Dr. Pawank Goenka. Dr. Sumantran, what do you think about the possibility and the scope of really an Indian brand or Indian brands really making it a kind of earning global acclaim and kind of really establish itself or themselves as reputed brands of choice?
Well, as we saw in the previous segment with Pawan, I think I'm quite confident of what we can accomplish in the two-wheeler business, mainly because of an excellent play being executed by people like Bajaj, TVS, and so on. So I think we seem to be on a good track there. We discussed the commercial vehicle possibilities and the opportunity, and I agree with Pawan's comments. When it comes to cars, somehow we have to recognize that the levels of scale and the levels of investment are in a different league. Now, frankly, the only two players out of India that could really make a global play out in the passenger cars and utility vehicle space would be Tata and Mahindra. And in their own way, they have. Tata has acquired JLR, and they've tried to establish a global footprint. Mahindra acquired SsangYong in Korea, and they've tried to establish a global footprint. But as we are beginning to find, the amount of money it takes to raise the ante sitting at that poker table is very expensive. I mean, the amount of money that Jaguar Land Rover would need to keep funding its next 5-year plan is not an insignificant sum, and it's going to be very difficult at the time when a company like Tata Motors has huge headwinds in the domestic market. One could make a very similar statement about Mahindra and SsangYong. So I think hopefully we will do this in the other segments, two-wheelers and commercial vehicles, before we do it in passenger cars and UVs.
Also, I believe that the shrinking product life cycle in the passenger vehicle space mainly, while everything else remaining the same in terms of investment, that makes the job even more challenging for passenger vehicle OEMs, isn't it?
Yes, and it gets back to the level of investment. I mean, passenger vehicles are probably the most regulated product. So you've got all of the regulations coming up: CO2 reduction, fuel efficiency, tailpipe emissions, the electrification roadmap, the connected vehicle roadmap, perhaps some degree of autonomy, or if not, ADAS and so-called dynamic or active cruise control. All of this is huge amounts of investment. And unless you have a huge volume that can underwrite the investments you make, it's very non-viable. So that's why this business of scale, global footprint is all kind of, they go hand in hand in the car business.
And so talking about investments, Dr. Sumantran, as you have also mentioned earlier, many of the companies' coffers are perhaps empty now because of this lull in operations. When it comes to financial sustainability, fiscal sustainability of a commercial sustainability of companies, how will it play out for companies to again almost start from near zero now?
I mean, we can see what's happening, and this is very well documented, particularly for the global companies, particularly the US companies. They've all gone and lined up huge credit lines. GM's probably now got enough credit for about $30 billion. Ford similarly, Daimler's got about $25, $26 billion. They've all lined up these credit lines because the biggest fear of an automaker is to run out of cash. So they have to make sure that they've got money to keep the business running. And the kind of cash burns the industry has is mind-boggling. So a $30 billion dollar reserve to go through the next few months can take them to 2 or 3 months. So it's not a lot of time that you are buying with this kind of money that you have. So while you do that to make sure that you can stay in operation, when you go through this standard business of cost cutting, the auto industry is just very used to this. Every 5 to 6 years, we've been in a down cycle, and everybody gets into the cost cutting mode. And cost cutting takes a lot of usually predictable approaches. Although COVID has been so aggressive and so deep financially that it is causing people to do things they've not done before. So the standard thing is, you shut down factories because of low capacity or low demand. You stop work on new product development. In fact, many US auto majors have said, stop work on every 2021 program, let them all carry over to 2022. And then many of them have started to exit markets. Renault has said, we can't any longer keep funding our stay in the Chinese market. So as much as they want to be in the Chinese market, Renault has said, now post-COVID, we're going to pack up and leave. The speculation that Nissan may leave Europe, it's not a market they've been making money. So all of this will be cutting costs. And we've already seen this before COVID. GM exited India, they exited Australia, they exited Europe. Ford is halfway out of India, they've already exited Australia. So all of these are cost reduction measures, cost cutting measures. And then, of course, they start more aggressively into, they were all looking at platforms. They were shrinking the number of platforms they would develop so that they could conserve the capital they had and make it work through many more projects. So they started to shrink down the number of platforms. And in case it was possible, they were even looking at sharing platforms. In fact, the big motivation right now for Peugeot, Citroën, PSA, and Fiat Chrysler, FCA to merge is to put those two platforms together. So that has become another important element of the strategy. And this is more so when you look at the future activities. We already mentioned the fact that GM and Honda will do electric vehicles together, and Ford and Volkswagen will be combining to invest for the future. So all of this, they hope, will then be enough to manage the near term and continue to invest for the foreseeable future. This is probably what they can do best.
And also perhaps this is also enhancing or strengthening the case for more collaboration, more joint efforts, which for whatever reasons we don't see much in India. Do you think it could also kind of gradually we see more such examples in the Indian automobile industry also?
I think it's high time we did, for a very simple reason that, if people like Volkswagen and Ford can collaborate, or a GM and a Honda can collaborate, uh, can't be reason why Indian companies with a compatible strategy or compatible corporate culture uh, would not be able to find room to collaborate. We have the handicap in India of not adequate scale. We have high cost of capital. Our investment dollars are borrowed at fairly high costs, not like China. So we have reasons to cooperate, share platforms, share architectures, and still, embellish the respective brands. Well, it's amazing, in India, of course, because of cross shareholding, the amount of collaboration and synergy between a Bajaj and KTM is phenomenal.
Yes.
And I'm sure going forward, what Bajaj can do with Triumph as well, or what TVS can do with the Norton and other brands will be examples. But there also cannot be any reason why across boundaries of shareholding, this kind of cooperation or collaboration may not happen. I think it's high time we did.
Right. I'm sure it would such developments in the industry will also make Indian CEOs really give it more mind space about the strategy of collaboration. Last word from you, Dr. Sumantran, in terms of fiscal discipline. I mean, funds, yes, many OEMs are kind of leveraging credit lines, but the cost of funds are also increasing. So what would you advise companies to kind of ensure that they have relatively better, better and sustainable financial health?
I must give credit to Indian companies for being very good with cost discipline. We go through this periodically. The industry goes through so many down cycles, and there is a major cost reduction initiative. Most of the big automakers I see go through this very often. And even in investment efficiency, perhaps because cost of capital is so high in India, we've already been seeing very good levels of capital efficiency. Now we've reached the limit. There's only so much you can wring the towel and get moisture out of it. The real challenge, the real next big step we can make in saving costs and saving or having better efficiency of capital allocation is really coming from leveraging scale. And going back to the last topic, unless we're able to collaborate and deploy the same investment across a much wider volume, there's only that much you can do in squeezing finance departments or squeezing operation departments or squeezing R&D and saying, get me more out of what you have.
Right. I think we can fairly confidently say that collaboration is going to be another global mega trend which will gain traction in the coming months and years. So thank you very much, Dr. Sumantran. We really appreciate your views, and I definitely enjoyed having this discussion with you, and earlier with Dr. Goenka also. So viewers, it brings us to the end of the first episode of this special discussion series, A New Order, in which we are looking at the road ahead for the Indian and the global automotive and mobility industry with discussions with major industry leaders from India and overseas as well. And we are really thankful to Dr. Sumantran for partnering us in this initiative. Always a pleasure. And if we meet again, please take care, stay safe, and stay healthy. Goodbye.